I was banned from the family business meeting because I'm just a woman. Those were my brother Derek's exact words as he physically blocked the conference room door while my father nodded in approval behind him. What they didn't know was that I owned the patents to every single product keeping their company afloat, and the email I was about to send would destroy everything they'd built in less than 48 hours. Subscribe to the channel and like the video to see more stories like this. My name is Catherine Hayes, 34 years old, and until that Tuesday morning in March, I had spent the last 12 years believing that family loyalty meant sacrificing my own recognition for the greater good. I was wrong. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the first ones to drain it. The Matthews family business started with my grandfather in 1972, a small industrial supply company that grew into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. My father, Robert Matthews, took over in 2003, and my brother Derek joined fresh out of business school in 2008. I came into the picture in 2012 after completing my master's degree in chemical engineering from Stanford. Here's what nobody tells you about family business. Your contributions become invisible the moment they can't be easily quantified on a spreadsheet. I spent 12 years developing proprietary coating formulations that revolutionized our product line. 12 years of late nights in the laboratory, of failed experiments and breakthrough innovations, of patents filed under the company name. And through it all, Derek got promoted to vice president while I remained Catherine from R&D. The meeting that changed everything was supposed to be about the future direction of Matthews Industrial Supply. Our biggest client, Thornton Manufacturing, was considering a $120 million contract renewal, and there were critical technical specifications that needed to be discussed. I had prepared a 30-page presentation on the new corrosion-resistant formula I'd developed specifically for their needs. I arrived at the office at 7:30 that morning, presentation materials in hand, wearing my best Navy suit. The conference room was on the 3rd floor, glass walls overlooking the production facility where our products came to life. I could see my father already seated at the head of the table, Derek beside him, along with our CFO Martin Chen and our sales director Patricia Gonzalez. As I approached the door, Derek stood up and walked toward me with that expression I'd come to recognize over the years, the one that said he was about to deliver bad news while pretending it was for my own good. "Catherine," he said, positioning himself directly in the doorway, "this meeting is for executive level only." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Derek, this meeting is about the Thornton contract. I developed the entire coding system they're interested in. I need to be here to answer technical questions." "We can handle the technical questions," he replied, his voice taking on that patronizing tone that made my jaw clench. "This is really more about business strategy, negotiations, numbers, you know, the big picture stuff." Behind him, I could see my father watching this exchange without intervening. Patricia looked uncomfortable, staring down at her papers. Martin seemed focused on his laptop screen. "The coding formula is literally my innovation," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "I filed 6 patents related to that system. How can you discuss it without me?" Derek sighed dramatically, as if I were a child refusing to understand basic logic. "Look, Catherine, you're great at the science stuff, really great, but this is a business meeting. These discussions get complex. They involve financial projections, market analysis, competitive positioning. It's just not really your area." "I have an MBA from Stanford," I reminded him, "along with my master's in chemical engineering. I think I can follow a business discussion." That's when he said it, the words that would replay in my mind for the next 48 hours, fueling every decision I was about to make. "Catherine, you're just a woman in a laboratory. You don't understand how real business works. This meeting is about strategy, about making tough calls, about things that require a certain level of, let's just say, decisiveness that comes more naturally to men. Dad and I have this handled. Why don't you go back to your lab and let us worry about the business side?" The silence that followed was deafening. I looked past Derek to my father, waiting for him to object, to tell Derek he was out of line, to remind him that I was a crucial part of this company. Instead, my father simply nodded. "Derek's right, sweetheart," he said, using that diminutive term he knew I hated. "These meetings can get contentious, lots of heated debate. You're more valuable to us in the lab, developing the products. Let the business people handle the business." Something crystallized in that moment. It wasn't just anger, though there was plenty of that. It was clarity. Brutal, unforgiving clarity about exactly how my family viewed me and my contributions. Patricia finally spoke up, her voice quiet. "Robert, Catherine did develop the entire coding system. Maybe she should at least be on call in case there are specific technical questions. We'll call her if we need her." Derek dismissed, still blocking the doorway. "Right now, we need to get started. Catherine, you're free to go." I looked at each of them in turn. My brother, so comfortable in his authority. My father, who had never once acknowledged my innovations in a board meeting. Patricia, sympathetic but unwilling to push back. Martin, still pretending this awkward moment wasn't happening. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll go back to my lab." Derek smiled, satisfied, and stepped aside to let me leave. As I walked back down the hallway, I could hear the conference room door close behind me, the lock clicking into place. They were literally locking me out of decisions about my own work. I didn't go to my lab. Instead, I went to my office, closed the door, and sat at my desk in silence for exactly 10 minutes, letting the full weight of what had just happened sink in. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder I'd created years ago, but never thought I'd actually need to use. Inside that folder were copies of every patent I'd filed over the past 12 years. 23 patents in total, covering everything from rust prevention prevention formulations to heat-resistant coatings to the revolutionary corrosion system that Thornton Manufacturing wanted, all filed under Matthews Industrial Supply as the applicant. But here's the thing about patents and intellectual property law. The inventor's name matters. My name, Catherine Hayes, was listed as the sole inventor on every single one of those patents. The company owned them only because I had assigned my rights to them as part of my employment. I pulled up another document, one I'd reviewed carefully when I first joined the company 12 years ago, my employment contract. I read through it again, paying special attention to the intellectual property clause. There it was, the section that would change everything. According to my contract, I agreed to assign all patents and inventions to the company during the course of and directly related to my employment duties as a research chemist. But there was a subsection, added at my lawyer's insistence when I'd negotiated the contract, that stated this assignment was conditional upon equitable treatment and recognition, commensurate with contributions made. At the time, it had seemed like standard legal language. Now, it was my weapon. I opened my email and began typing. The recipients, my patent attorney, Sarah Chen, who had filed all 23 patents on my behalf. The subject line, urgent, review of patent assignments and breach of contract. The email detailed everything, from my systematic exclusion from business meetings to my lack of recognition, to that morning's explicit statement that I was just a woman in a laboratory who didn't understand real business. I attached my employment contract and asked Sarah for an immediate consultation on the legal standing of my patent assignments, given the company's breach of the equitable treatment clause. Sarah responded within 30 minutes. Can you be at my office at 2 this afternoon? This is potentially significant. I confirmed the appointment, then spent the next 3 hours documenting everything I could remember. Every meeting I'd been excluded from, despite having relevant expertise. Every presentation where my work was credited to the research team or company innovation without my name mentioned. Every time Derek had been promoted while I remained stagnant. Every board meeting where my father introduced Derek as the future of this company, while I sat invisible in the back row. At 1:30, I left the office without telling anyone where I was going. As I drove to Sarah's downtown office, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Meeting went great. Thornton is moving forward. Your coding system sealed the deal. Thanks for your work. Thanks for my work. As if I were a contractor they'd hired, not a family member who had poured 12 years of her life into building this company's technical foundation. As if the $120 million contract they'd just secured wasn't built entirely on innovations I'd created. Sarah's office was in a high-rise building, all glass and steel, overlooking the city. She met me in her conference room, already surrounded by printouts of patent documents. Catherine, she said as I sat down, I've reviewed every patent we've filed for you over the years. I've also reviewed your employment contract. If what you've told me is accurate about the systematic exclusion and disparate treatment, we may have grounds to challenge the patent assignments. What does that mean exactly? I asked. It means, Sarah explained carefully, that if the company materially breached the employment contract through inequitable treatment, the conditional clauses regarding intellectual property assignment may be voidable. In plain English, you might be able to reclaim ownership of your patents. The implications crashed over me like a wave. And if I reclaimed them, then Matthews Industrial Supply would need your permission to use any of those formulations. Without them, they couldn't manufacture approximately 75% of their current product line, including the entire coating system that Thornton Manufacturing just agreed to buy. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. This wasn't just about being excluded from a meeting anymore. This was about 12 years of invisible labor, of watching my brother take credit for my achievements, of hearing my father introduce me as our lab tech at industry events, while Derek got titles like strategic visionary. What would you need to move forward with this? I asked. Sarah opened a folder. Detailed documentation of the breach of contract. Witnesses if possible, though your testimony combined with company records might be sufficient. Evidence that the treatment was systematic rather than isolated incidents. And then we'd need to send a formal notification to the company of your intent to challenge the patent assignments. How long would that take? The notification? I could have it drafted by tomorrow morning if you give me everything I need today. Tomorrow morning, while Derek and my father celebrated their successful meeting, while they congratulated themselves on securing the Thornton contract using my innovations, while they continued to view me as just a woman in a laboratory who didn't understand real business. Let's do it, I said. We spent the next 4 hours going through everything. Sarah took notes, asked probing questions, requested copies of emails and performance reviews and company announcements. By 6:30, she had everything she needed. I'll have the formal notification ready by 9 tomorrow morning, she said as I prepared to leave. Catherine, I need you to understand the implications of this. If we move forward and succeed in voiding the patent assignments, you'll essentially own the intellectual property foundation of your family's business. The relationship dynamics will be irreversibly changed. They were already irreversibly changed this morning, I replied, when my brother told me I'm just a woman who doesn't understand real business. Now he's going to find out exactly how well I understand it. I drove home that evening with my hands steady on the wheel, my mind clearer than it had been in years. My apartment was a small one-bedroom in the city. Nothing fancy. Nothing like the houses Derek and my father lived in with money made from formulations I had created. I ordered takeout, opened a bottle of wine, and sat on my couch reviewing everything that was about to happen. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your father told me about the meeting today. He said you were upset about not being included. said. Honey, you know Derek is better at the business side of things. Why don't you focus on what you're good at? Even my mother, who I'd thought might understand, had absorbed the family narrative that my technical expertise was somehow less valuable than Derek's MBA and my father's business experience. None of them could see that without my innovations, there would be no business to manage. I didn't respond to my mother's text. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting an email of my own, one that I would send the moment Sarah's legal notification was delivered. This email would go to the entire board of directors, to our major clients, to industry publications. It would detail my contributions over the past 12 years, every patent, every innovation, every formulation that had driven company growth. It would also make very clear that as of tomorrow morning, Matthews Industrial Supply would need to negotiate with me directly for the continued use of those innovations. At 11 that night, I received an email from Sarah. Notification drafted and ready for review. This is your last chance to reconsider. Once this is sent, there's no going back. I reviewed the document. It was devastating in its precision, laying out the breach of contract, the systematic disparate treatment, the legal grounds for challenging the patent assignments. It gave Matthews Industrial Supply 48 hours to respond before I would file formal legal action to void the assignments. 48 hours, 2 days for them to understand that the woman they dismissed as just a laboratory tech held the power to dismantle everything they'd built on her invisible labor. I replied to Sarah, send it first thing tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. Then I closed my laptop, finished my wine, and went to bed. For the first time in 12 years, I slept soundly, knowing that tomorrow everything would change. The notification arrived at Matthews Industrial Supply at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. I know because I was sitting in my car in the parking lot watching the main entrance when the courier walked through the glass doors carrying the certified envelope addressed to Robert Matthews, CEO. I waited 15 minutes before going inside, giving them enough time to open it, read it, and begin to process what it meant. When I walked through the lobby, Jenny at reception gave me her usual cheerful good morning, completely unaware that the foundation of this company was about to crack open. My lab was on the second floor, a space I'd designed myself 5 years ago when the company expanded. State-of-the-art equipment, proper ventilation, organized workstations. This was my domain, the place where I'd created every innovation that made Matthews Industrial Supply competitive in the market. Walking through that door had always felt like coming home. Today, it felt like visiting a place I was already beginning to leave behind. I had barely set down my bag when my office phone rang, Derek's extension. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Catherine, I need you in Dad's office right now, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. I'm in the middle of calibrating some equipment, I replied calmly. Can it wait until this afternoon? No, it cannot wait. Dad's office, now. He hung up before I could respond. I took my time walking upstairs, stopping at the break room for coffee, checking in with 2 of my lab technicians about their morning tasks. By the time I reached my father's corner office on the 4th floor, 20 minutes had passed since Derek's call. The door was open. Inside, my father sat behind his massive mahogany desk, the notification letter spread out in front of him. Derek stood by the window, arms crossed, his face flushed red. Martin Chen, our CFO, sat in one of the leather chairs, looking pale. My mother was there too, which surprised me, perched on the edge of the couch with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Close the door, my father said as I entered. I did, then took the remaining empty chair, crossing my legs and sipping my coffee while they all stared at me. What is this? My father demanded, jabbing his finger at the letter. What the hell is this, Catherine? It's a legal notification, I said evenly. I thought the letterhead made that fairly clear. Don't be smart with me, he snapped. You're challenging the patent assignments? You're threatening to take back the formulations? Have you lost your mind? No, I replied. I've actually found it. After 12 years of losing myself and trying to be the daughter and sister you wanted, I finally remembered who I actually am. Derek moved away from the window, his hands balling into fists. This is insane. Those patents belong to the company. You filed them as an employee. You can't just decide to take them back because you got your feelings hurt about one stupid meeting. One meeting? I set down my coffee cup carefully. Derek, I've been excluded from strategic meetings for 12 years. I've watched you take credit for my work. I've listened to Dad introduce you as the future of this company while I'm dismissed as lab personnel. Yesterday was just the moment I finally had enough. We never took credit for your work, my father protested. I pulled out my phone and opened a folder I'd prepared. Really? Let me read you some quotes. This is from the annual shareholder meeting last year. Quote, under Derek's innovative leadership, we've developed cutting-edge coating technologies that have revolutionized our product line. That coating technology was mine, Dad. Every single formulation. I scrolled to another document. Here's another one. Industry magazine interview 6 months ago. Question, what's the secret to Matthews Industrial Supply's technical advantage? Your answer, we have a great team, but really it comes down to Derek's vision and business acumen in identifying market opportunities. No mention of the chemist who actually created the products filling those opportunities. That's just business speak, Derek said dismissively. Nobody cares about the technical details. Thornton Manufacturing cares, I countered. That $120 million contract you closed yesterday, it exists because of technical details. My technical details. The corrosion-resistant coating system they're buying took me 3 years to develop. I ran over 400 test iterations. I personally presented the results to their engineering team 6 months ago. And yesterday, you literally blocked me from the meeting about my own innovation. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. Catherine, sweetie, sweetie, this is so extreme. Can't we just talk about this like a family? We are talking about it, I said. This is what talking about it looks like when you've spent 12 years being ignored. Martin cleared his throat nervously. Catherine, I need to understand the legal basis here. Your employment contract assigned those patents to the company. That's pretty standard for research positions. It is standard, I agreed, but my contract had a conditional clause. The assignment was contingent on equitable treatment and recognition commensurate with contributions. The company breached that condition. That's absurd, my father said. We paid you a good salary. You had full access to equipment and resources. How is that not equitable? Derek makes $260,000 a year as vice president, I said flatly. I make $95,000 as a senior research chemist. Derek got promoted 4 times in 12 years. I got promoted once. Derek has stock options and a seat on the board. I have neither. Derek gets his name on press releases and conference presentations about innovations I created. Tell me again how that's equitable treatment. The silence that followed was heavy. I could see Martin doing mental calculations, probably figuring out the financial implications. My father's face had gone from red to pale. Derek looked like he wanted to hit something. You're doing this for money? My father finally asked, his voice thick with disgust. This is about money? I thought you were better than that, Catherine. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. No, Dad, this isn't about money. If it were about money, I would have left years ago and sold my expertise to your competitors. This is about recognition. This is about being treated like my contributions matter. This is about not being told I'm just a woman who doesn't understand real business. Derek shouldn't have said that, my mother interjected quickly. He was having a stressful morning. He didn't mean it. He meant every word, I said, and you all believed it. That's why nobody objected when he blocked me from that meeting. That's why Dad nodded in agreement. That's why nobody has ever once stood up and said, Catherine deserves credit for her work. My father leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. So what do you want? This is obviously about leverage. You want a promotion, a raise, a seat on the board? Name your price. It's not about a price, I said quietly. It's about respect. It's about 12 years of betrayal dressed up as family loyalty. It's about building everything you have on my invisible labor and then telling me I don't understand business. Fine, Derek snapped. You want respect. You want recognition. We'll put your name on the next press release. We'll give you a fancy new title. We'll throw you a party and tell everyone how great you are. Happy? Now drop this lawsuit nonsense. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. The notification gives you 48 hours to respond. I suggest you spend that time talking to your lawyers about the strength of your position. Martin, you might want to start calculating what happens to the Thornton contract if the company loses access to the coding formulations. Dad, you should probably prepare the board for some uncomfortable conversations. Catherine, sit down, my father ordered. We're not done here. Actually, we are, I said. I have work to do in my lab. Real work. The kind that actually creates value for this company, even if nobody wants to admit it. I walked toward the door, my hand on the handle when Derek moved to block my path, just like he'd done the day before at the conference room. You're not leaving until we settle this, he said. I looked up at him. This brother who had spent our entire adult lives diminishing my contributions while building his career on my achievements. Move, Derek. Or what? You'll sue me too? No, I said calmly. I'll have security escort you away from me. Patricia witnessed you physically blocking me from the meeting yesterday. If you do it again, that's a pattern of hostile behavior. Martin, would you say that creates liability for the company? Martin looked miserable. Please don't put me in the middle of this. You're already in the middle of it, I told him. You're the CFO. When this company loses access to 75% of its product line, you're the one who'll have to explain to shareholders why the stock price is tanking. Derek stepped aside, his jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. I opened the door and walked out, my heart pounding but my steps steady. Back in my lab, I closed the door and allowed myself exactly 60 seconds to shake, to let the adrenaline work through my system. Then I got back to work, because whatever happened next, I was still a chemist. Still someone who solved problems through careful analysis and precise execution. My phone buzzed constantly for the next hour. Texts from my mother begging me to reconsider. Missed calls from Derek. An email from my father with the subject line, family meeting tonight, mandatory. I ignored all of it and focused on the spectrometer readings in front of me. At noon, Patricia Gonzalez knocked on my lab door. She looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot. Can I come in? She asked. I gestured to a stool. What can I do for you, Patricia? I wanted to apologize, she said quietly, for yesterday, for not speaking up more strongly. You were right. You should have been in that meeting, and I should have pushed back harder when Derek excluded you. Why didn't you? I asked, genuinely curious. She sighed. Honestly, because it's easier to go along than to make waves. Because Derek and your father control everything in this company, and standing up to them risks my own position. Because I told myself it wasn't my problem. She looked at me directly. But I was wrong. What they did was wrong. What they've been doing for years is wrong. Thank you for saying that, I said. It means more than you know. For what it's worth, Patricia continued, I think you're doing the right thing. This company runs on your innovations, and you deserve recognition for that. I just hope it doesn't destroy the family business in the process. After she left, I sat thinking about her words. Did I hope that? Did I want Matthews Industrial Supply to survive this? Or was some part of me hoping to watch it crumble? The truth was complicated. This company had been built by my grandfather, grown by my father. It employed 63 people who depended on it for their livelihoods. But it had also been built on exploitation of my labor, on systematic dismissal of my contributions, on a fundamental disrespect for who I was and what I'd accomplished. The question wasn't whether the company deserved to survive. The question was whether I deserved to be treated as an equal partner in the enterprise I'd helped build, or whether I should take my expertise and start something new, something where my voice wouldn't be dismissed as just a woman who doesn't understand business. At 3 o'clock, Sarah Chen called. I've received a call from Matthews Industrial Supplies attorney. They want to meet tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, at a neutral location. They're bringing their full legal team. What does that mean? I asked. It means they're taking this seriously, Sarah replied. It means they've run the numbers and realized how much trouble they're in. Catherine, I need to prepare you for what comes next. They're going to make offers. They're going to try to negotiate. They might even apologize. You need to decide before that meeting what outcome you actually want. What did I want? Revenge, vindication, money, recognition, or something more complicated than any of those things? I'll think about it, I told Sarah, but whatever I decide, I'm not backing down. They need to understand that the days of taking me for granted are over. That evening, I ignored the mandatory family meeting and instead went to my favorite restaurant alone. I ordered an expensive bottle of wine and the best steak on the menu, paying for it with money I'd earned through my own talent and hard work. As I ate, I thought about all the moments over the years when I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less demanding, in service of keeping the family peace. I thought about the patents I'd filed, each one representing weeks or months of intensive work. I thought about the innovations that had allowed Matthews Industrial Supply to compete with companies 10 times its size. I thought about the Thornton contract and the millions of dollars in revenue it represented, all built on formulations I'd created. And I thought about Derek's face when he'd blocked that conference room door, so certain of his authority, so comfortable with dismissing me. By the time I finished my meal, I knew exactly what I wanted. Not revenge, though there would be an element of that. Not just money, though fair compensation was part of it. What I wanted was something simpler and more profound. I wanted them to see me, really see me, not as Derek's sister or Robert's daughter or the woman in the lab, but as Catherine Hayes, the chemist whose innovations had built their success. Tomorrow's meeting would determine whether that was possible. And if it wasn't, well, I had 23 patents and 12 years of experience. The world was full of companies that would value what I had to offer. The woman who had quietly accepted her place in the background was gone. The woman who had prioritized family harmony over personal recognition had woken up. And the family business that had taken her for granted was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the true cost of betrayal. The conference room at the downtown Marriott was neutral territory, as Sarah had promised. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, morning light streaming across the long mahogany table that separated the two sides. On one side sat Matthews Industrial Supply's legal team, 3 attorneys in expensive suits, Martin Chen with his laptop open, and my father and Derek, both looking like they hadn't slept. On my side, Sarah Chen, me, and the weight of 23 patents that could dismantle everything they'd built. The lead attorney for Matthews Industrial Supply was a woman named Victoria Brennan, 50-something with steel gray hair and a reputation for being ruthless. She opened a leather portfolio and extracted several documents. Ms. Hayes, she began, her tone professional but cold, we've reviewed your notification and the employment contract in question. While we dispute the characterization of breach, we're here in good faith to reach an amicable resolution. Good faith, I repeated. That's an interesting phrase coming from a company that spent 12 years taking credit for my work while systematically excluding me from recognition. Victoria's expression didn't change. Let's focus on constructive solutions rather than accusations. We've prepared an offer that we believe addresses your concerns. She slid a document across the table. Sarah picked it up, reviewed it quickly, and her eyebrows rose slightly before she passed it to me. The offer was generous, I had to admit. Immediate promotion to Vice President of Research and Development, reporting directly to the CEO. Salary increase to $185,000 annually, plus stock options. A seat on the board of directors. Retroactive bonus of $200,000 for past contributions. Public recognition in a press release highlighting my role in developing the company's core technologies. Additionally, Victoria continued, Mr. Matthews has agreed to issue a formal apology for yesterday's incident and to implement sensitivity training for all executive staff regarding gender equity in the workplace. I looked at my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at some point on the wall behind me. Derek sat rigid, his face carefully blank. This is a substantial offer, Catherine, Sarah said quietly. It addresses many of your stated concerns. It does, I agreed, setting the document down. It's exactly what I would have been thrilled to receive 3 years ago, maybe even 1 year ago. But not now? Victoria asked. Now it feels like hush money, I said, a way to make the problem go away without actually addressing the fundamental issue. Which is, my father finally spoke, his voice rough, which is that you've built a corporate culture where my contributions are invisible unless I threaten legal action, I replied, which is that my brother can physically block me from meetings and face no consequences, which is that every innovation I create gets credited to company leadership or strategic vision while I remain nameless in the background. The offer includes public recognition, Victoria pointed out. 1 press release, I said. 1 public acknowledgement of 12 years of work, offered only because I forced your hand. What happens next year when I develop another breakthrough formula? Will I have to threaten another lawsuit to get my name attached to it? Derek leaned forward, speaking for the first time. What do you want, Catherine? Seriously, just tell us what it would take to end this. genius. I looked at him across that table, this brother who had built his entire career on innovations I'd created. I want what you've always had, Derek. I want to walk into a meeting and be heard. I want my accomplishments to be mine, not attributed to someone else's leadership. I want to stop being introduced as our chemist, while you're called the strategic visionary behind our success. Fine, he said. You can have all of that. Take the offer. Be a vice president, sit on the board, get your recognition, problem solved. It's not solved, I said quietly, because you don't actually see the problem. You think this is about a title or a salary. It's about 12 years of systematic betrayal by the people who were supposed to value me most. My mother's voice came from the doorway. I hadn't noticed her enter, but there she stood, clutching her purse like a shield. Catherine, please, you're tearing this family apart. No, Mom, I said. The family was already torn apart. I'm just the first one to stop pretending otherwise. She moved into the room, sitting down beside my father. We're offering you everything you asked for. What more could you possibly want? I want an acknowledgement that what happened wasn't just about one meeting or one comment, I said. I want Dad to admit that he's treated Derek's contributions as more valuable than mine for years, despite the fact that my innovations drive the actual revenue. I want Derek to acknowledge that he's accepted credit for work he didn't do. I want you to admit that you've enabled this dynamic by always telling me to be understanding, to be accommodating, to focus on what I'm good at and let the men handle the business. The silence that followed was painful. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father's jaw clenched. Derek looked away. Victoria broke the moment. Ms. Hayes, emotional satisfaction aside, let's discuss the practical reality. If you proceed with voiding the patent assignments, Matthews Industrial Supply will be forced to halt production on 75% of its product line. That will result in breach of contract claims from clients, including the Thornton contract. The company will likely face bankruptcy. 63 employees will lose their jobs. I'm aware of the consequences, I said. Are you willing to live with that outcome? Victoria pressed. To destroy the company your grandfather built? To put dozens of families out of work? All because you feel unappreciated? It was a calculated move, trying to make me feel guilty, trying to make this about selfish revenge rather than justified response to systematic mistreatment. But I'd anticipated it. Let me ask you something, Victoria, I said. If a man developed revolutionary technology and then was told he was just a lab tech who didn't understand real business, would you tell him to accept it quietly? If a male engineer was systematically excluded from strategic meetings about his own innovations, would you call him selfish for demanding recognition? She didn't answer. The employees at Matthews Industrial Supply aren't going to lose their jobs because I'm standing up for myself, I continued. They're going to lose their jobs if it comes to that, because this company's leadership chose to build their entire operation on stolen credit and exploitation. That's not my responsibility. That's theirs. Martin spoke up, his voice strained. Catherine, from a purely business perspective, the company cannot survive without access to those formulations. We have contracts, obligations, deadlines. If you reclaim the patents, we'd need to spend years developing alternatives, if we even could. You'd effectively be shutting us down. Then accept my terms, I said simply. What terms? My father demanded. You rejected our offer. What the hell do you actually want? I pulled out a document I'd prepared the night before, sliding it across the table. These terms. Sarah had reviewed them, made them legally sound. Now Victoria picked them up, her expression unchanging as she read. But I saw my father's face go pale as she passed pages to him. My terms were simple. I wanted 51% ownership of Matthews Industrial Supply. I wanted the CEO position, with my father transitioning to chairman emeritus and Derek reporting to me as VP of Business Development. I wanted complete control over how innovations were credited and presented. I wanted the company renamed to Hayes Matthews Industrial Supply, honoring both my grandfather's legacy and my own contributions. In exchange, I would license my existing patents back to the company at a nominal fee and would continue to develop new innovations as the company's technical leader. This is insane, Derek exploded, standing up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. You want to take over the entire company? Dad built this business. You want to just steal it from him? I built this business too, I said calmly. Every coding formula, every rust prevention system, every technical advantage we have over competitors came from my work. Dad managed it. You marketed it, but I created it. The only difference is that your contributions were always visible and valued while mine were hidden. You want revenge, my father said, his voice hollow. This is about punishing us. No, I replied. This is about recognition. This is about ensuring that going forward, my contributions are valued appropriately. And yes, it's about making sure that you can never again dismiss me as just a woman who doesn't understand business. My mother was crying openly now. Catherine, you can't do this. This company is your father's whole life. It's his legacy. It's my legacy too, Mom, I said. I've been building it for 12 years. The fact that you can't see that none of you could ever see that, is exactly why these terms are necessary. Victoria set down the papers. Ms. Hayes, this offer is unreasonable. No court would force a company to transfer majority ownership based on a conditional employment clause. Perhaps not, Sarah interjected, but a court would certainly void the patent assignments if we can prove systematic breach of the employment contract's equitable treatment clause. And once those patents are voided, Ms. Hayes owns the intellectual property outright. She could license it to competitors. She could start her own company. She could refuse to work with Matthews Industrial Supply entirely. So the question isn't whether a court would force this transfer. The question is whether this this family wants to negotiate a solution that keeps the company operational, or whether they want to watch it collapse while Catherine builds something new. The reality of the situation settled over the room like a heavy fog. Without my formulations, Matthews Industrial Supply was just another industrial supply company, undifferentiated from dozens of competitors. With them, it was an industry leader with proprietary technology that commanded premium prices. My father had built the business infrastructure. Derek had managed client relationships, but I had created the actual value, the innovations that made clients choose us over everyone else. And they had all taken that for granted, assuming my contributions would always be available, always be free, always be credited to someone else. "You've got to be kidding," Derek said, his voice shaking with rage. "Dad, tell her this is crazy. Tell her we're not just going to hand over the company." My father sat silent, staring at the terms I'd laid out. I watched him process the impossible choice: accept my demands and lose control of the company he'd run for over 20 years, or reject them and watch that company collapse entirely. "I need time to think," he finally said. "You have until 5 o'clock today," I replied. "That's when my 48-hour notification period expires. After that, Sarah files to void the patent assignments and I take my expertise elsewhere." "Elsewhere?" my mother asked. "What does that mean?" "It means I've had 3 job offers this week," I said. It was true. After news of my legal challenge had leaked through industry networks, competitors had started reaching out. 2 from companies that would pay me substantially more than I make now, with full recognition and leadership positions. 1 from a venture capital firm interested in funding a startup around my formulations. "You'd go work for our competitors?" Derek looked genuinely shocked. "That's industrial espionage." "No," I corrected. "That's called a job market. My expertise isn't tied to Matthews Industrial Supply. You just assumed it was because I'm family, because I've always been here, because you took my loyalty for granted." I stood up, gathering my papers. 5 o'clock. Decide whether you want to continue as a family business with me as an equal partner, or watch me walk away and build something new. Either outcome works for me. The question is which one works for you. As I walked toward the door, my father called out, "Catherine, wait." I paused, turning back. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely confused rather than angry. "We're family. I raised you. I gave you opportunities. Why are you trying to destroy everything?" I looked at this man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had sent me to good schools, who had given me a job at his company. This man who had also systematically diminished my contributions, who had stood by while Derek dismissed me, who had built his business on my invisible labor. "I'm not trying to destroy anything, Dad," I said quietly. "I'm trying to be seen. For 12 years, I've been the invisible foundation holding up this company. Now I'm asking to be recognized as the architect, not just the bricks. If that feels like destruction to you, maybe that says more about how you valued my contributions than it does about my demands." I left the conference room, Sarah following behind me. In the elevator, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know they might reject your terms," she said. "They might let the whole thing collapse rather than give you control." "I know," I said. "And you're prepared for that outcome?" "I am," I replied. "Because even if they reject the terms, I'll still walk away knowing my worth. I'll still build something new where my contributions are valued. The only question is whether they're prepared to lose everything they've built, rather than admit I was essential to building it." We stepped out into the bright morning sunshine. My phone was already buzzing with messages, family group chat exploding with panic and recriminations. I silenced it without reading. "What do you think they'll choose?" Sarah asked. I thought about my father's face, about the shock and confusion there. I thought about Derek's rage, about how his entire identity was built on being the heir apparent. I thought about my mother's tears, about her desperate attempts to keep the family together even if it meant I had to make myself smaller. "I don't know," I admitted, "but by 5 o'clock tonight we'll find out if family loyalty is stronger than pride, if recognition of my contributions is possible, or if they'd rather lose everything than admit I was right." The afternoon stretched ahead, hours of waiting to see whether betrayal could be undone or if revenge would be the only justice available. Either way, the woman who had once quietly accepted being called just a woman in a laboratory was gone. In her place stood someone who understood her own value and refused to accept anything less than full recognition. The family business had a choice to make, and so did the family. I spent the afternoon in my apartment deliberately avoiding the office. Every 30 minutes, my phone buzzed with new attempts at contact. Derek sent a series of increasingly desperate texts. My mother called 6 times, leaving voicemails that ranged from pleading to accusatory. Even relatives I hadn't heard from in years started reaching out, having apparently been recruited to the cause of changing my mind. I ignored them all and instead reviewed the 3 job offers I'd mentioned. They were real, not bluffing. Titan Industrial Coatings was offering $220,000 plus equity to head their research division. Crosstech Solutions wanted me as Chief Innovation Officer at $250,000. And the venture capital firm, Meridian Partners, was proposing to fund a startup with me as founder and CEO, with projected first-year funding of $5 million. Any of those options would be a fresh start, a chance to build something where my contributions would never be questioned. But they would also mean walking away from the company my grandfather had founded, from 12 years of my own innovations, from the family business that was as much mine as anyone else's, regardless of whether they acknowledged it. At 4:30, Sarah called. "I just heard from Victoria Brennan. They want to meet again. 5 o'clock at the same location. They have a counter proposal." A counter proposal to my proposal? Deal? I asked, apparently. Catherine, I think you should know. Victoria sounded different this time, less adversarial, almost conciliatory. That could be a negotiation tactic. It could be, Sarah agreed, or it could mean they've actually accepted how serious this is. Either way, you need to decide now what your bottom line is. What would you actually accept? I thought about it, staring out my apartment window at the city below. What did I actually want? Complete control, public vindication, or something more nuanced? My bottom line, I said slowly, is genuine equality. Not token gestures, not performative recognition, but actual structural change that ensures my contributions are valued going forward. The specifics of how we achieve that are negotiable. The principle isn't. At 4:55, I walked back into that same conference room. This time, only my father, Derek, and Victoria Brennan were waiting. My mother was absent, and I suspected that was intentional. This was business now, not family drama. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years since morning. Derek sat slumped in his chair, his earlier rage replaced by something that looked like exhausted defeat. Catherine, Victoria began as I sat down, we've spent the afternoon discussing your proposal and exploring alternatives. Your father and brother want to make a counteroffer that they believe addresses your core concerns while maintaining operational continuity. She slid a new document across the table. I picked it up, aware that all three of them were watching my face as I read. The counteroffer was different from their morning proposal, substantially different. They were offering me 49% ownership, just shy of majority control, but enough to make me an equal partner. The position would be co-CEO alongside my father for a transition period of 2 years, after which I would assume sole CEO responsibilities. Derek would be demoted from vice president to director of client relations, reporting to me. The company name would change to Matthews Hayes Industrial Supply, acknowledging both legacies equally. Additionally, all existing patents would be formally registered as jointly owned by me and the company, with explicit documentation of my role as inventor. All future innovations would follow the same structure with my name permanently attached. A portion of company profits would be allocated to a research and development fund under my complete control. No board approval required. There's one more thing, my father said, his voice rough. He pulled out a handwritten letter and pushed it across the table. This will be published in the company newsletter, sent to all clients, and posted on our website. I picked up the letter and began to read. To our clients, partners, and employees. For the past 12 years, Matthews Industrial Supply has benefited from the groundbreaking innovations of Dr. Catherine Hayes, our lead research chemist, and my daughter. Her proprietary formulations have been the foundation of our technical advantage and competitive success. However, we have failed to adequately recognize and credit her contributions publicly. This was wrong, and I take full responsibility for creating a corporate culture where her essential work was attributed to general company leadership rather than her individual brilliance. Catherine developed every major coating system we've brought to market since 2012. The corrosion-resistant technology that recently secured our largest contract came entirely from her research and expertise. Going forward, all innovations will be properly credited to their creators, starting with full acknowledgement of Catherine's past contributions. I am proud to announce her promotion to co-CEO and look forward to her leadership guiding our company into the future. Robert Matthews, founder and chairman. I set down the letter, my hands not quite steady. This wasn't just a token acknowledgement. This was my father publicly admitting his mistakes, crediting my work specifically, and committing to systemic change. Why? I asked, looking at him directly. Why now? What changed between this morning and this afternoon? My father was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion I'd rarely heard from him. Martin ran the numbers. If you void those patent assignments, the company is bankrupt within 60 days. I'd lose everything I built. But more than that, he showed me something I should have seen years ago. He pulled up every major contract we've won in the past decade. Every single one was secured because of technical specifications that you developed. Every competitive advantage we have traces back to your innovations. He paused, rubbing his face with both hands. I spent the afternoon believing you were trying to destroy my legacy. Then I realized that without you, there is no legacy. You didn't just contribute to this company's success, Catherine. You are the foundation of it. And I've been too proud, too stupid, and too stuck in my old ways of thinking to see that. I owe you an apology too, Derek said, his voice quiet. He wouldn't look at me, staring instead at the table. I've spent 12 years taking credit for work you did. I told myself I was just translating your technical expertise into business strategy, but that was bullshit. I was stealing your accomplishments and calling it leadership. Yesterday, when I blocked you from that meeting and said those things, I knew I was wrong even as I was saying it. I just couldn't admit that my entire career has been built on your invisible labor. The admission hung in the air between us. This was what I'd wanted, what I'd demanded. Acknowledgement, recognition, genuine understanding of what they'd done. But now that I had it, I found myself feeling something unexpected, not triumph, but a profound sadness for all the years we'd wasted in this dysfunctional dynamic. If I accept this counteroffer, I said slowly, I need to know this isn't just crisis management. I need to know that when the immediate threat passes, you won't slide back into old patterns, that Derek won't resent reporting to me, that Dad won't undermine my decisions because he thinks he knows better, that the entire company culture will actually change, not just the titles on our business cards. I can't promise I won't struggle with it, my father said honestly. I've been running this company for over 20 years. Letting go of control isn't going to be easy for me, but I can promise I'll try, and I can promise that I finally understand what's at stake. Not just the company's survival, but your respect, which I've lost and need to earn back. Derek nodded. I'm not going to pretend I'm happy about being demoted. I'm not. But you're right that I don't deserve the position I had. I've been coasting on your work, and that needs to stop. If working under your leadership is what it takes to learn how to actually earn my position in this company, then that's what I'll do. I looked at the counter offer again, reading through the details more carefully. It wasn't everything I'd demanded, but it was substantial. 49% wasn't majority control, but with the co-CEO structure and the explicit authority over research and development, I'd have effective veto power over major decisions. The public acknowledgement was comprehensive, not token. The structural changes were meaningful and enforceable. I want some additions, I said finally. First, an independent HR audit of company culture, with mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, not just executives. Second, the establishment of formal mentorship programs for women in technical fields, funded by the company. Third, a board committee specifically focused on equitable recognition and advancement, with me as chair. And fourth, a clause in the corporate bylaws that requires transparent documentation of innovation sources, so that no one's contributions can be made invisible again. Victoria made notes. Those are all reasonable additions. I can have them incorporated into the agreement. One more thing, I said, looking at Derek. Yesterday, you physically blocked me from a meeting. That's not acceptable in any workplace, family business, or not. I want a clear company policy on professional conduct, with consequences for violations that apply equally regardless of family relationships. If you ever try to intimidate me or anyone else on staff again, there need to be real repercussions. Derek flinched but nodded. Agreed. I sat back, processing everything. They were giving me almost everything I'd asked for. The question was whether I believed they would actually follow through, or whether this was just an elaborate way to keep me from walking away with my patents. I need one guarantee, I said. I need this agreement structured so that if the company ever violates its terms, specifically regarding recognition and equitable treatment, the patent licenses automatically revert to me. That way, there's a built-in consequence for backsliding into old patterns. That's severe, Victoria said. It essentially puts the company's survival in perpetual jeopardy. It puts the company's survival contingent on treating me fairly, I corrected. If that feels like perpetual jeopardy to you, maybe that tells us something about how confident you are in this cultural change actually sticking. My father met my eyes. Put it in the agreement. If we violate the terms, you deserve to walk away with your patents. That's fair. I looked at Sarah, who had been quietly reviewing the documents. She gave me a small nod. The offer was legally sound. The protections were real, and the consequences for betrayal were severe enough to keep them honest. All right, I said finally. I'll accept the counteroffer, with the additions I specified. On one condition. What condition? My father asked. That we all agree this isn't just about saving the company, I said. That we're actually trying to repair the family, not just the family business. That means honest communication going forward, not just legally binding contracts. That means you actually listen when I speak, not just in meetings, but at family dinners. That means treating me like an equal partner in every sense, not just on paper. My father stood up slowly and walked around the table. For a moment, I thought he might try to hug me, but instead, he extended his hand, formal and deliberate. You have my word, he said, not just as your father, but as your business partner. I see you now, Catherine, really see you. And I'm sorry it took the threat of losing everything to make me look. I stood and shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't the unconditional victory I'd fantasized about when I first contacted Sarah. It was messier, more complicated, tinged with grief for all the years we'd lost to dysfunction, but it was real, and it was something we could build from. Derek stood too, though he looked uncertain. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to work for my little sister. How to acknowledge that I've been getting credit for her achievements. How to rebuild from here. We figure it out together, I said. That's what family business is supposed to mean. Actually working together. Not one person doing all the work while others take the glory. He nodded, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen in years. Genuine respect. Victoria pulled out her phone. I can have a revised agreement ready for signatures by tomorrow morning. Is that acceptable? Make it this evening, I said. I want this resolved before the 48-hour deadline expires. No more waiting, no more uncertainty. 3 hours later, we were back in that conference room with fresh agreements printed and ready for signatures. Sarah had reviewed every clause, confirmed every protection, verified every consequence. The document was 78 pages of legal language that essentially restructured Matthews Industrial Supply from the ground up. As I signed my name across the last page, I felt something shift inside me. This company was mine now, not in secret, not in invisible labor, but in formal recognition. Hayes Matthews Industrial Supply, led by Dr. Catherine Hayes, whose innovations had built its success. My father signed next, then Derek, then Martin and Patricia as witnesses. The company that had dismissed me as just a woman in a laboratory now bore my name and my leadership. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for the first time in 2 days. My mother opened the door, her eyes red from crying. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I'm sorry for all the times I told you to accept your place, to not make waves, to let the men handle business. I was wrong. You were scared, I said gently. Scared of conflict, scared of threatening Dad's authority, scared of change. I understand that, but I can't live my life trying to avoid making waves anymore, Mom. Sometimes the waves need to happen. She hugged me tightly, and I let myself lean into it, remembering that she was both my mother and a product of her own conditioning, both someone who had hurt me and someone who loved me. Inside, the family gathered around the dinner table, the first meal we'd shared since the crisis began. It was awkward, stilted, full of long silences and careful word choices, but it was also a beginning, a tentative first step towards something healthier. "To Catherine," my father said, raising his glass. "To the woman who saved this family business by refusing to let us take her for granted anymore. To partnership," I countered, raising my own glass. "To actually working together instead of one person carrying everyone else." We drank, and in that moment, I allowed myself to believe that change was possible, that betrayal could be overcome, that family loyalty could mean something real instead of code for shut up and accept your place. The revenge I'd imagined had transformed into something more valuable: recognition. The justice I'd demanded had arrived not as destruction, but as reconstruction. And the woman who had walked into that conference room yesterday morning, desperate to be seen, walked out tonight knowing she would never be invisible again. The family business was ours now, truly ours, built on acknowledged contribution rather than stolen credit. And that, I was learning, was worth more than any amount of vindication. The first 3 months as co-CEO of Hayes Matthews Industrial Supply were a masterclass in navigating the gap between promises and reality. My father's public letter had gone out to every client and industry contact, triggering reactions that ranged from supportive to skeptical to openly confused. Several older clients called to express concern about the leadership transition, their unspoken question clear: could a woman really run a technical industrial company? I answered by inviting them to tour our research facility personally, walking them through the innovations I'd developed, explaining the chemistry behind our competitive advantage in terms they could understand. By the end of the first month, 3 of those skeptical clients had increased their orders, impressed not just by my technical expertise, but by my ability to translate complex science into business value. Derek, to his credit, mostly kept his word about the reporting structure. Mostly. There were moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves, like the morning he scheduled a client meeting without consulting me first, then acted surprised when I pointed out that as co-CEO, I needed to approve major client interactions. "I've been handling Midwest manufacturing for 5 years, he said defensively. "I didn't think I needed permission to keep doing my job." "You don't need permission," I replied evenly. "You need collaboration. That's the difference between the old way and the new way. We make decisions together now, Derek." That was the whole point. He'd nodded, apologized, and rescheduled the meeting with me included. Small victories, but they added up. The bigger challenge was the corporate culture change. Decades of ingrained patterns didn't shift overnight just because we'd signed legal documents. I discovered this 3 weeks into my new role when I overheard 2 senior engineers discussing a presentation. "Just keep the technical details simple," one said to the other. "You know how Catherine gets when we go too deep into the chemistry? She prefers the big picture business stuff." I stopped in the hallway, processing what I'd just heard. They had it completely backward, assuming that as co-CEO, I'd abandoned my technical expertise for business generalities, when the entire point was that I could do both. I walked into their office unannounced. "I have a PhD in chemical engineering from Stanford," I said calmly. "I've published 17 papers in peer-reviewed journals. I developed every coating formula this company has brought to market in the past 12 years. I promise you, I can handle the technical details. In fact, I insist on them." Their faces went pale. "Ms. Hayes, we didn't mean—" "I know you didn't mean any disrespect," I interrupted. "But this is exactly the kind of assumption we're working to change. My business acumen doesn't diminish my technical expertise. Both can exist in the same person. Remember that." After they left, I sat in their empty office for a moment, struck by the realization that even after everything, even with my name on the building and my title on the masthead, some people still couldn't quite believe that a woman could be both scientifically brilliant and business savvy. The independent HR audit I'd demanded revealed even more uncomfortable truths. The report, delivered 6 weeks into the new structure, detailed systemic patterns of gender disparity throughout the company. Women in technical roles consistently earned less than their male counterparts with equivalent experience. Promotions favored men even when women had stronger performance reviews, and the language used in company communications regularly attributed innovations to the team or leadership when women were the actual developers, while explicitly crediting men by name for similar contributions. I presented the findings at a board meeting, watching the discomfort ripple through the room. My father looked genuinely shocked, as if he'd never considered that the patterns that had affected me might extend throughout the organization. "This needs immediate correction," I said, "not just for legal compliance, but because we're hemorrhaging talent. 3 of our best researchers left in the past 2 years for competitors. All 3 were women. All 3 cited lack of advancement opportunities. We're literally losing our competitive advantage because of discrimination." "What do you propose?" Patricia asked. She'd been a surprising ally in the transition, perhaps because she'd experienced her own version of being overlooked as a woman in sales. "Salary equity adjustments effective immediately," I said. "Retroactive bonuses for women who were underpaid in previous years. A clear, transparent promotion criteria that eliminates subjective bias. And mandatory training for anyone in a leadership position on recognizing and crediting contributions accurately." "That's going to be expensive," Martin pointed out, though his tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "Not as expensive as losing our best people and facing discrimination lawsuits," I replied. "Besides, we can afford it. The Thornton contract alone generates enough profit to cover these corrections twice over." The measures passed unanimously, though I noticed some of the older board members voted with visible reluctance. Change was happening, but it was being dragged forward rather than embraced enthusiastically. The real test came 8 weeks into the transition when Thornton Manufacturing requested a meeting to discuss expanding their contract. They wanted to add corrosion protection for a new line of industrial equipment, a project worth potentially $80 million over 3 years. My father assumed he'd lead the meeting with Derek handling client relations and me providing technical support, the old dynamic reasserting itself through habit. I had to explicitly remind him that as co-CEO, I would be leading the negotiation. Catherine, no offense, but Vernon Thornton is old school, my father said carefully. He's more comfortable dealing with men in business settings. Maybe it's strategic to let Derek and me handle the relationship aspects while you focus on the technical presentation. I looked at him steadily. Dad, we signed an agreement that I would have equal authority. We published a letter saying I was responsible for the innovations that secured their business in the first place. If we walk in there with me playing technical support while you and Derek play business leaders, we're undermining everything we committed to changing. I'm just thinking about what's best for securing the contract, he protested. What's best for securing the contract is demonstrating that the person who created their current coding system is now empowered to lead the strategic direction of future innovations, I said. Vernon Thornton might be old school, but he's also smart enough to recognize value. Trust me to show him that value. The meeting took place at Thornton Manufacturing's headquarters, a sprawling facility outside Chicago. Vernon Thornton was indeed old school, 70-something with the weathered face of a man who'd spent decades in industrial manufacturing. He greeted my father and Derek with firm handshakes and familiarity, then turned to me with obvious uncertainty. Catherine, my father said smoothly, is now co-CEO and led the development of the coding systems you're currently using. Is that right? Vernon said, and I couldn't tell if his tone was skeptical or impressed. Didn't know Robert had such a talented daughter hiding in the lab all these years. Not hiding anymore, I said, extending my hand. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss expanding our partnership. The meeting lasted 3 hours. I presented the technical specifications for the new corrosion protection system I'd been developing specifically for their needs, then walked them through the business case for why our solution was superior to competitors. I answered Vernon's questions with precision, anticipated his concerns, and demonstrated detailed understanding of both the chemistry involved and the financial implications. Halfway through the presentation, I noticed Vernon's posture change. He leaned forward, genuinely engaged, asking increasingly technical questions that showed he actually understood the material. By the end, he was nodding with what looked like respect. I'll be honest with you, Catherine, he said as we prepared to leave. When I heard about the leadership change, I had concerns. Old habits, old assumptions about who's qualified to run a technical company. But you just sold me on an $80 million contract expansion by demonstrating you understand our needs better than anyone I've talked to at any of your competitors. Robert, you've been holding out on us all these years, keeping her in the back room. I'm correcting that mistake now, my father said, and I heard genuine pride in his voice. On the flight home, my father was quiet, staring out the airplane window. Finally, he spoke without looking at me. I spent 20 years telling myself I was building something for you and Derek to inherit, he said, that I was creating opportunities for both my children. But I was really only creating opportunities for Derek, wasn't I? You had to fight for every bit of recognition while he had it handed to him. Yes, I said simply. There was no point in softening the truth now. I told myself it was just how things worked in business, he continued, that technical people stayed technical and business people stayed business. But the truth is, I couldn't imagine my daughter running the company. Couldn't picture it, even though you were more qualified than Derek ever was. Why? I asked. Why couldn't you imagine it? He was quiet for a long time. Because my father couldn't imagine it either. Because when I took over the company, I had to fight against people who thought I was too young, too inexperienced. And somewhere along the way, I decided the solution was making sure my son wouldn't face those same challenges. I never stopped to think about what I was doing to my daughter in the process. You can't change the past, I said, but you can make sure we build something different going forward. He nodded, and we spent the rest of the flight in silence. But it felt different from the hostile silences of 3 months ago. This was the quiet of two people who had finally started being honest with each other. The changes continued to ripple through the company. The diversity training led to uncomfortable conversations, but also genuine breakthroughs. The salary adjustments brought appreciation from staff who'd been quietly undervalued for years. The new recognition protocols meant that when innovations happened, the actual innovators got credit, which boosted morale and retention. But not everyone was happy with the new order. 6 weeks into implementation, Derek came to my office looking uncomfortable. 3 of the senior sales guys are threatening to quit, he said without preamble. They're upset about what they're calling preferential treatment for women. They think the salary adjustments were reverse discrimination. Let them quit, I said calmly. Derek looked startled. Catherine, they handle major accounts. We can't afford to lose them right now. We can't afford to keep people who view equity corrections as discrimination, I countered. If they're that uncomfortable with women being paid fairly, they're probably uncomfortable with me as their CEO too. Better to know that now than have them undermine changes from the inside. But their accounts will be reassigned to people who actually support what we're building here. I finished. Derek, this is what real change looks like. It's not comfortable. Some people won't like it, some people will leave. But if we compromise on equity to keep people comfortable, we're right back where we started. 2 of the 3 did quit. Their accounts accounts were divided among remaining staff, including 2 women who'd been consistently passed over for major client opportunities. Within a month, both women had not only maintained those accounts, but had identified expansion opportunities the previous handlers had missed. The third sales representative, after a mandatory coaching session on equity and inclusion, decided to stay. 6 months later, he told me it was the best decision he'd ever made, that working in an environment where everyone's contributions were valued had made him better at his job. 10 weeks into the transition, my mother invited me to lunch. We met at her favorite restaurant, the same place where our family had celebrated milestones for decades. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her napkin. "I've been thinking a lot about my role in all of this," she said finally. "About all the times I told you to keep quiet, to not make waves, to let the men handle things. I was teaching you to make yourself smaller, Catherine. I was teaching you that your value came from not being a problem. You were doing what you thought was right," I said gently. "What you'd been taught was right. That doesn't excuse it," she replied, her eyes filling with tears. I watched my daughter create brilliant innovations and told her to be grateful for being allowed in the lab. "I should have been demanding they put your name on everything. I should have been your advocate, not your jailer. You can be my advocate now," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "It's not too late to start." She squeezed my hand tightly. "I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of you for refusing to accept what I accepted, for demanding more than I ever thought to demand, for showing me that women don't have to choose between family and recognition." That lunch felt like another piece of healing, another relationship being rebuilt on honesty instead of suppressed resentment. 3 months after becoming co-CEO, I was invited to speak at the National Industrial Coatings Conference, the industry's premier annual event. The invitation came addressed specifically to me, not to the company, requesting a keynote on innovation in corrosion prevention technology. Standing backstage before my presentation, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 months earlier, the one who had accepted being called just a woman in a laboratory because fighting seemed too exhausting, the one who had watched her brother accept credit for her work because family loyalty demanded silence. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that real family loyalty meant demanding the family be worthy of that loyalty, that real love meant refusing to enable dysfunction, that real success meant building something sustainable on truth instead of maintaining something broken through denial. I walked onto that stage and delivered a presentation that was equal parts technical brilliance and business strategy, demonstrating exactly what my father and brother had tried to deny. That expertise in both domains wasn't contradictory, it was essential. The standing ovation at the end felt like vindication, but more than that, it felt like arrival. I had finally stepped fully into my own power, no longer waiting for permission, no longer making myself smaller to fit someone else's expectations. The family business had been saved, but more importantly, it had been transformed, and I had been transformed with it. 1 year after I became co-CEO of Hayes Matthews Industrial Supply, I stood in the newly renovated research facility watching my team test the latest innovation, a self-healing coating system that could revolutionize infrastructure maintenance. The lab bore a plaque now, installed at my insistence, the Dr. Catherine Hayes Research Center, where innovation has always had a name. The transformation of the company had exceeded even my cautious optimism. Revenue was up 32%, driven by innovations that were now properly credited and marketed. Employee retention had improved dramatically, particularly among women and younger researchers who finally saw paths to advancement. And the culture, while still imperfect, had shifted from one where contributions were invisible to one where recognition was expected. My father had fully transitioned to chairman emeritus 6 months earlier, attending board meetings but letting me lead operations. The shift hadn't been easy for him. I'd caught him twice trying to override my decisions before catching himself and apologizing. But each time, he got better at stepping back, at trusting that the company he'd built was in capable hands. Derek had surprised me most of all. After the initial resentment faded, he'd actually become a more effective leader by focusing on what he was genuinely good at: client relationships and business development. Without the pressure of pretending to understand technical details he didn't, he'd relaxed into his strengths. Our working relationship had evolved into something approaching actual partnership. "Catherine," he'd said to me last month, "I need to tell you something. I'm thinking about going back to school for an MBA in sustainable business practices. Not because I need another credential, but because I actually want to learn. For the first time in my career, I'm not trying to prove I deserve to be here. I'm trying to actually become the person this position needs." That conversation had meant more to me than any apology. It showed he understood that the problem hadn't just been his treatment of me, it had been his entire approach to his career, built on appearances rather than substance. The Hayes Matthews success story had attracted industry attention. 3 major publications had profiled the company's turnaround, focusing on the leadership transition and cultural transformation. The articles portrayed my father positively, as someone willing to acknowledge mistakes and implement radical change. I'd been careful in those interviews to give him credit for his willingness to evolve, even as I didn't shy away from describing the systemic problems that had required evolution. But the real marker of change came from unexpected places, like the email I'd received 2 months ago from a young chemical engineer named Lisa Chen, no relation to Sarah or Martin, who had just accepted a position with Hayes Matthews. "I'm writing to tell you why I chose your company," she'd written. "I had 3 offers, all with similar salaries, but only Hayes Matthews had a woman leading the technical division. Only Hayes Matthews had explicit policies about recognition and equity. Only Hayes Matthews made me believe that my contributions would be valued and credited. You changed an entire company culture, and in doing so, you've changed what's possible for women like me. Thank you. I'd printed that email and kept it in my desk drawer, pulling it out whenever I doubted whether the struggle had been worth it. There had been setbacks, of course. 2 board members had resigned rather than support the equity initiatives, claiming the company was becoming too focused on social issues instead of profit. I'd let them go without attempting to change their minds. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and people who couldn't see that equity and profit were intertwined weren't the partners I needed. We'd also lost the Johnson account, a smaller but long-standing client whose owner had been friends with my father for decades. He'd called to say he was uncomfortable working with a company that was too politically correct now. My father had been upset about losing that relationship, but I'd reminded him that we'd gained 3 larger accounts in the same quarter from companies that specifically sought us out because of our commitment to equity and innovation. You're teaching me that there's more than one way to build a business, he'd admitted, that values can be assets, not just costs. The family dynamics had also shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Sunday dinners were different now, actual conversations instead of performances. My mother asked about my work with genuine interest, no longer deflecting to Derek's activities or my father's opinions. She'd even started taking online business courses, saying she wanted to understand what I dealt with every day. The most unexpected change came from my extended family. Aunts and uncles who had barely acknowledged my existence began calling to congratulate me on the company's success, on my keynote speeches, on the industry recognition I'd received. Several younger cousins reached out asking for mentorship advice about navigating male-dominated industries. At a family reunion 6 months into my new role, my Uncle Richard had pulled me aside. "I owe you an apology," he'd said. "When you were younger, I used to tell your father that Derek was the one with the business sense, that you were too emotional for corporate leadership. I was wrong. I let my assumptions about women in business blind me to your actual capabilities. I'm sorry. What changed your mind?" I'd asked. "Your father changed his," he'd replied simply. "If Robert Matthews can admit he was wrong about his own daughter, the rest of us have no excuse." The personal toll of the transformation had been significant. Several friendships had fractured under the strain of family conflict. Some relatives still didn't speak to me, viewing my actions as having betrayed family loyalty rather than demanded it. And there were nights when I lay awake wondering if I'd done the right thing, if I'd been too harsh, too uncompromising. But then I'd walk into the research center with my name on it, or lead a board meeting where my decisions were respected without question, or receive an email from a young woman thanking me for changing what was possible. And I'd remember why I'd fought so hard. The self-healing coding system we were developing represented the culmination of everything the new Hayes Matthews stood for. It was technically brilliant, commercially viable, and ethically developed, with full credit going to every researcher who contributed. The patents would list 5 inventors, 3 of them women, all with their names prominently featured in every presentation and publication. "Dr. Hayes," called Maria Rodriguez, one of the lead researchers on the project, "we've got the test results you wanted to see." I walked over to examine the data, feeling the familiar excitement of scientific breakthrough. The coding had exceeded our performance targets, self-repairing minor damage within hours and major damage within days. This innovation alone could generate hundreds of millions in revenue over the next decade. "This is excellent work, Maria," I said. "Make sure your name is first on the patent application. This was your breakthrough." She smiled, and I saw in her expression the same validation I'd sought for 12 years. The difference was, she wouldn't have to wait 12 years to receive it. That evening, I had dinner with my parents and Derek at their request. We gathered around the same table where so many tense family meetings had occurred, but the atmosphere was different now. "We wanted to talk about succession planning," my father said after we'd finished eating, "specifically about transitioning you from co-CEO to sole CEO. I think it's time." I'd expected this conversation eventually, but not quite so soon. "Are you sure?" We agreed on 2 years, and it's only been 1. "I'm sure," he said. "You don't need me looking over your shoulder anymore, Catherine. You've proven you can lead this company better than I ever did. The board agrees, Derek agrees, and I'm ready to fully step back and enjoy retirement while watching what you build." "I agree too," Derek added. "You've earned it. Hell, you earned it 12 years ago. We were just too blind to see it." My mother reached across the table to take my hand. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she said softly. "He built this company because he believed in creating something that would last. You've not only preserved that legacy, you've made it better, more just, more sustainable. That's true success." The formal transition happened a month later at a special board meeting. My father handed me the CEO title with a speech that was surprisingly emotional, acknowledging his past failures and his hope for the company's future under my leadership. Several board members had tears in their eyes, moved by the moment's significance. As sole CEO, I implemented the final changes I'd been planning: a profit-sharing program that rewarded all employees, not just executives, a scholarship fund for young women pursuing STEM degrees, an innovation challenge that sought ideas from every level of the organization, not just the research division, and a formal mentorship program pairing experienced researchers with junior staff, ensuring knowledge transfer and career development. 6 months later, Forbes published an article titled "How Dr. Catherine Hayes Transformed a Family Business by Refusing to Accept Invisibility." The piece detailed the journey from being excluded from meetings to leading the company, framing it as as a case study in organizational change and gender equity in male-dominated industries. The article went viral in business circles. I received speaking invitations from universities, corporations, and professional organizations. A literary agent contacted me about writing a book. And most satisfying of all, 3 of our competitors quietly overhauled their own recognition and equity policies, clearly responding to the attention Hayes Matthews was receiving. But the moment that meant the most came during a site visit to our largest manufacturing facility. I was touring the floor with the plant manager when a young equipment operator approached nervously. "Dr. Hayes," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. I've been working here for 3 years, and I've had ideas about improving the coding application process, but I never thought anyone would listen. The new Innovation Challenge program made me feel like my ideas mattered. They're actually testing my process improvement this month. What's your name?" I asked. "Jennifer Walsh." "Jennifer, if your process improvement works, your name goes on it. Not the company's name, not my name. Yours. That's how we do things now." She smiled so brightly it nearly broke my heart, thinking about all the Jennifers who had ideas that were never heard, contributions that went uncredited, potential that was wasted because systems were designed to keep certain voices quiet. A year and a half after the conference room confrontation that had changed everything, I sat in my office reviewing quarterly results. Revenue was up 40% from pre-transition levels. Employee satisfaction scores had increased dramatically. Innovation output had doubled, and Hayes Matthews Industrial Supply was now ranked as one of the best companies to work for in our industry. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Board meeting prep session at 3? I have some ideas for the Asia expansion you wanted to discuss." I smiled, remembering how different those messages used to be. Derek telling me about decisions he'd already made rather than asking for collaboration. The change wasn't complete. We still had occasional friction, occasional backsliding into old patterns, but the foundation had shifted from exploitation to partnership. My father stopped by unexpectedly that afternoon, something he did less frequently now, but always with purpose. He sat down across from my desk and looked around the office that had once been his. "You've redecorated," he observed. "I moved some things around," I acknowledged. "Made it feel more like mine." "Good," he said. "That's how it should be. Catherine, I wanted to tell you something. I've been working with a therapist trying to understand why I couldn't see your value for so many years. Why I was so invested in Derek being the heir apparent that I couldn't imagine you in that role." I set down the report I'd been reading, giving him my full attention. "She helped me see that I was repeating patterns from my own father," he continued. "He was a good man in many ways, but he had very fixed ideas about gender roles, about what men did and what women did. I absorbed those ideas without questioning them, and then I perpetuated them with my own children. I'm sorry, Catherine, not just for the specific ways I failed you, but for all the years I couldn't see past my own conditioning. Thank you for telling me that," I said quietly. "And thank you for doing the work to understand it. I want you to know," he added, "that I'm telling other men about this journey, other fathers who run family businesses. I'm sharing what I learned about the cost of assumptions, about the damage of invisible labor, about the importance of genuinely valuing all contributions. If I can keep even one other father from making my mistakes, maybe that's something." After he left, I sat thinking about the complexity of forgiveness, about how it wasn't a single decision, but an ongoing process. I hadn't forgotten the years of dismissal, the moments of betrayal, the systematic devaluation of my work, but I also couldn't deny the reality of his growth, the genuine effort he was making to become better. That evening, I attended an industry awards ceremony where Hayes Matthews was receiving recognition for innovation in sustainable coding technologies. As I accepted the award on stage, I made a point of naming every researcher who had contributed to the project, reading their names clearly into the microphone for the audience to hear. "This recognition belongs to all of them," I said in my acceptance speech. "For too long, innovation has been credited to leadership or organizations while the actual innovators remained anonymous. At Hayes Matthews, we're changing that because we believe that when people's contributions are seen and valued, they create even more brilliance. Recognition isn't just fair, it's good business." The applause was thunderous. Later, several other CEOs approached me to discuss implementing similar practices at their companies. I handed out business cards for the diversity consultants we'd worked with, genuinely hoping more organizations would embrace this approach. Walking to my car after the ceremony, award in hand, I reflected on the journey. From the morning Derek had blocked that conference room door to this moment of industry recognition, everything had changed. The company had changed, my family had changed, and I had changed most of all. I was no longer the woman who quietly accepted being called just a woman in a laboratory. I was Dr. Catherine Hayes, CEO of Hayes Matthews Industrial Supply, innovator, leader, and proof that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes it's the catalyst for writing a better one. The family business that had dismissed me now bore my name. The brother who had blocked my path now collaborated with me. The father who couldn't imagine my leadership now celebrated it. And the company that had been built on my invisible labor now showcased my contributions proudly. This wasn't the revenge I'd imagined when I first contacted Sarah Chen. It was better, because revenge would have felt good for a moment, but ultimately left me empty. This, what I'd built, was justice that created something sustainable, something that would benefit not just me, but every person who came after me. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying what hurt you, it's transforming it into something that can never hurt anyone the same way again. What did you think of this story? Have you ever had to stand up for your own value when others tried to diminish it? Have you witnessed someone challenge a system that took them for granted? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for your support and for watching until the end.